هنبتدي بأستاذة دكتورة عائشة سعد، كانت جاية من بره وسايبة يعني أوروبا والدول المتقدمة وأمريكا وجاية تدرس في الجامعة الأمريكية. فهي كان عندها كده باشن وكوز وكده، فكنت أخدها للشباب الصغير مع إبراهيم في الإسماعيلية اللي هم عايزين بقى يعني إيه أي وسيلة علشان تنطلق وتخرج الى العالميه، ولاقيين واحده جايه من العالميه وقررت انها تخش في جامعه امريكيه وتروح تقعد في الاسماعيليه، تقعد مع العيال الصغيره طلبه الجامعه علشان تتكلم معاهم السوشيال انتربرينور ازاي يبقى ليهم قضيه وكده. فكانت بتعلم علينا كلنا يعني، وكانت بتقول لي تعالى مثلا كلاس عشان تشوف، انا راجل بتاع سي اس ار وكده علشان ممكن نسالك في حاجه او كده. فاخش اخش في السيشن عندها الاقي نفسي بنهج وراها وهي بتتكلم. فهي عندها طاقه لا نهائيه وعلم واسع جدا جدا، بس عندها قدره انها تختزله وانها تتكلم بسرعه تخلي الواحد يلهث وراها عشان هو يتعلم منها. وهي من دور يعني بنات اخويا صغنطوطه، بس هي ما شاء الله بتحرق مراحل، كل حاجه بتخلصها بسرعه جدا جدا. وانا بس دلوقتي بتساءل يعني ايه المحطات اللي جايه اللي لسه ما خلصتهاش. فهنحاول ان احنا نستغلك في الاوقات اللي انت قاعداها هنا يا عائشه. نسعد بيكي وتكلمينا اكتر على ايه البيربس بتاع الشركات، ايه المانديت بتاعها، ازاي تخلق لنفسها امباكت، وازاي دوت تطور على مر يعني الاعوام.
سعيدة جدا اني اكون معاكم. برضو as a disclaimer انا متمكنة اكتر بالانجلش عن العربي، فهدخل الاثنين مع بعض، بس لو في اي حاجة مش واضحة او يعني لو اتكلمت بسرعة زيادة او كده مفيش اي احراج، يعني انكم توقفوني. هعرف نفسي سنة عشان تعرفوا الكونتنت جاي منين. انا حاليا بعد ما درست في الاي يو سي رجعت امريكا ودرست law في ييل، وبعدين دلوقتي انا fellow في ييل law school، وهبتدي مع الهارفارد بروجرام on corporate governance من اغسطس اللي جاي. فمعظم الريسيرش بتاعي دلوقتي يعني centralized في legal issues relating للcorporations والcorporate liability والpublic impacts of the corporation. فأنا موضوع corporate mandate actually sits at the center of my research and scholarship دلوقتي. فأنا شايفة إن my contribution في البانل إن أنا أرسم خريطة. نعم؟
أنا هسألك السؤال الأول، ليه اهتميتي بموضوع الcorporate؟
ليه؟
إيه اللي دخلك على البرايفت سيكتور؟ إيه اللي دخلك
10 years ago كان عندي interest في حد شاف فيلم إيرين بروكوفيتش؟ Yeah, okay. 20 years ago, I saw the movie Erin Brockovich, I came to grasp أكتر تأثير corporations at a large scale في inequality developmental disparity. وكنت مهتمة أكتر بالinterventions اللي تمنع outcomes زي اللي حصل في الموفي. في الأندرجراجويت يعني I moved أكتر من politics public policy interventions and became more interested in private sector contributions. The corporation today, as a scale and as impact, is more influential on most governments. That's where my research shifted. Yeah. The potential for corporations to do good and bad. No? أنا شايفة إن دوري النهاردة إن أنا أرسم خريطة الموضوع، يعني أنا جاية من جهة علمية أكتر، فشايفة إن أنا دوري إن أنا أرسم البارامترز بتاعة الموضوع و set the scene للactual practitioners. فأنا I'm gonna start with providing a historical and general global context للموضوع corporate mandate. وبعدين هدي 3 examples. The manifestation بتاع more corporate mandate today in very real and high profile conversations أو trends in the corporate sector. وبعدين عايزة في الآخر أتكلم برضو briefly عن ال Egyptian context و introducing ideas for where this comes to bear على ال Egyptian context النهاردة. very generally historical context أنا شايفة إن مسألة زي corporate mandate has gained a lot of popularity في الفترة اللي فاتت، خصوصاً في السنتين اللي فاتوا في ال socially responsible investment وفي ال public impacts of companies و the crisis of capitalism. و there's generally at a global level a lot of concern with the public role of the corporation. بس الموضوع ده مش حديث، يعني ال public role of the corporation originates with the origin of the corporation، ودي حاجة أنا بشوفها مهمة إن إحنا نذكرها في الحوارات عشان to recognize in the way that corporations are characterized is not static. إن الحوار ده has been continuing for 200 years plus. There's a lot to learn from the past. We're not reinventing المسائل دي. To give some general context, the modern corporation أو شكل corporation اللي إحنا عارفينها النهاردة became popularized في أمريكا in the 1800s تقريبا. At the time for the corporation to get license to operate عشان الحكومة تسمح لها فعليا انها to be established كان في الcorporate charter. والcorporate charter كان لازم الcorporation تحدد الهدف الاجتماعي اللي هي بتحققه. Actually, corporations didn't start out with the mission of maximizing profit. Corporations started out with the mission of performing some large public function كان بيحتاج a large amount of capital. Capital is pooled from different investors. But in order to receive a corporate charter from the state government, corporations had to establish some kind of public purpose. So it was the railroad companies and public utilities companies. That was the only way to justify getting a license to operate. So historically, this started changing in the 1900s. في أمريكا, you have 50 states, so each state has its own laws. Many of you who have startups that are incorporated, probably in Delaware. What started in the 1920s in الولايات ابتدوا يتنافسوا مع بعض to develop the most enabling laws عشان عايزين الشركات to register in their own state. فنيو جيرسي ابتدت in the early 1900s بدل ما يبقى فيه restrictive social purpose of the corporation to get a license to operate بقى فيه اللي بيسموهم enabling laws. Pretty much laws weren't restrictive in the same ways they had been before. وبعدين نيو جيرسي repealed laws وDelaware filled the gap. ولما نيو جيرسي رجعت Delaware خلاص كان عندها pretty much monopoly over corporate law. So you'll find most companies today, حتى I taught a seminar الأسبوع اللي فات where someone had Chaise Longue, one of the startups that was participating, was incorporated in Delaware. This is not at all unusual. Legal context for Delaware is the most permissive. So this is a very short historical trajectory لأصل فكرة الcorporate mandate, where this starts to arise in popular conversation. In the US in the 1940s, around the time of the Cold War, we split into فكرة الshareholder primacy والstakeholder theory. Shareholder primacy هي اللي بتقول إن هدف الcorporation أو الشركة عامة مش لازم الcorporation is to maximize profit. وده الهدف الرئيسي يعني beginning and end. That was in the 1940s when Nobel-winning economist Milton Friedman نشر opinion editorial for New York Times saying the social responsibility of the corporation is to make a profit. ومن وقتها this has become a very dominant idea. Counter to that idea اللي بيسموها stakeholder theory. Stakeholder theory I think is more representative to everyone's mindsets in the room today, and that identifies the mandate بتاع corporation to maximize a number of stakeholder interests. The stakeholder interests being the employees, the community, the investors, the startups, the small businesses. Stakeholder theory, less common in the US, more common in Europe, allows for more participants in the justifying mandate of the corporation. Okay, so this is the historical part of our context. The more contemporary part of our context هو إن في السنتين 5 سنين إلى سنتين اللي فاتوا موضوع corporate mandate has gained a lot of mainstream attention. Before it used to be a bit more fringe. CSR wings in a multinational corporation kind of under marketing or PR. It's seen حتى في legal scholarship to talk about anything besides the purpose to make a profit with shareholder interest was seen as very left-wing و not very serious. بس في الفترة اللي فاتت لعدة أسباب corporate mandate has become more central to very mainstream conversations. So one example, in August 2019, Business Roundtable في أمريكا, Business Roundtable is like 180 CEOs لأكبر شركات في أمريكا. Walmart, Amazon, Apple, JP Morgan Chase. The biggest companies, their CEOs comprise Business Roundtable. In August 2019, they published a letter, and it gained a ton of public attention. The letter was on a statement on the purpose of a corporation. That's today's topic, first and foremost. And the very notable contribution في letter ده, إنهم they said that corporations should be managed for the benefit of all stakeholders. This was really dramatic. Every major news outlet, Forbes, Financial Times, New York Times, Washington Post, everyone wrote about it. عشان for the main and very mainstream CEOs to be saying that stakeholders should be taken into account was a big departure from the party line. So,
why the shift?
Because politics, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, the general public crisis, seeing that corporations aren't benefiting them, the gap between the rich and the poor. Today, corporations are facing a public relations crisis. So one of the interpretations, and the CEOs see, and it's not sustainable to ignore all of this, and they want to be part of the conversation before government regulates them in ways they don't want.
2008 crisis.
2008 crisis is not as central النهارده. ده أكتر a reflection of, I'll tell you a number of concrete things. أول حاجة في أمريكا monopoly accusations ضد Amazon were a number of large companies and very serious steps being taken to investigate whether they're monopolies. تاني حاجة lawsuits against major مثلا pharmaceutical companies بسبب الادكشن crisis اللي حاصل بالopioids في أمريكا, kind of similar to tramadol مثلا. There are a number of very high-profile lawsuits that are looking into billions of dollars of damages, lawsuits against the fossil fuel companies بسبب climate change. A lot of these lawsuits are now very realistically getting to trial. السبب الثالث in Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are viable contenders for the Democratic ticket, and this is their agenda. فالموضوع بقى much more mainstream than it would have been a number of years ago. Yeah, بس الحاجات دي these helped set the stage, but they're not as dominant today. يعني Occupy, 2008 financial crisis, these were long ago enough that they've informed a generation, but the main moving actors are these more contemporary issues.
يعني الفكرة لو أنا فاهم صح إن Occupy والحركات اللي زي كده بتشكل وعي الشباب.
بالظبط.
وبالتالي بتحرك الببليك على إن هو يpush and advocate for something.
بالظبط.
ودوت بيترجم لأصوات والترندز مختلفة. فسواء مع البوليتكس أو مع الشركات.
Yeah.
الشباب دلوقتي الميلينيالز بقوا.
أنا داخلة في الموضوع ده ما تسمعنيش. Okay. So the second point. دي من ناحية المانجمنت. We see a management trend to be attentive للcorporate mandate. من ناحية الانفستمنت, BlackRock اللي هي أكبر investment company in the world, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink publishes a letter every year in January, an annual letter to CEOs. فهو as the main investor publishes a letter to CEOs pretty much informing what investors want. In 2018, Larry Fink's letter talked about profit and purpose. That was the title. In 2019, he talked about long-term value creation with companies serving all company stakeholders. But this was also seen as a big deal. It got op-eds in all of the major news outlets in the very mainstream, حتى not impact investment, ولا socially responsible investment. It's the most mainstream investment voice saying that purpose is so central now. Alongside that, socially responsible investment has skyrocketed globally. And يتهيألي ده اللي أيمن كان ابتدى يوجهنا ليه, إن millennials are interested in their money having purposeful impact. Some statistics, there's a study من 2018 out of Harvard Business School saying that 82% of investors consider environmental, social, and governance issues when making decisions. That's huge. Alongside that, socially responsible investment has gained huge traction. In the early 1920s, it was 0.00002% of annual assets under management. Well, I know this statistic because it was in a major lawsuit that was trying to advocate for environmental, social, and governance issues to go into investor decision making. والمحكمة في أمريكا قالت إن ده مش مسموح عشان it's such a negligible amount of investors that care about these issues, and it's not going to be relevant for general investor decision making. النهاردة 26% of assets under management are in socially responsible investment funds. So we see first in management and now in investment, in the corporate purpose, corporate mandate, things beyond the generation of profit have become essential lil investors. جاي منين؟ جاي من historical window that preceded بقى اللي دلوقتي those who are starting to have money to invest for Occupy, the 2008 financial crisis. Generally, this generation having more interest in values, not just in returns. And environment, بالظبط. So that's management, investment, and the third prong that I wanted to highlight is in corporate models. In Northern Europe, there's a very interesting corporate model that I've spent some time studying recently called the foundation-owned firm. The foundation-owned firms are primarily dominant for Norway, Sweden, Scandinavian countries, and Germany as well. Well, foundation-owned firms are very interesting because it's usually a foundation is established by the original founder of a company. where the founder wants a certain social legacy, or a charitable legacy, بعد transition the successive generations. So what happens is they establish a foundation, where the foundation has majority ownership in the corporation, and that can't be changed. Yeah, it's part of the stipulations of the corporation's legal status, in that majority shareholding cannot be sort of lessened in any form. Well, foundation has a charitable end, and it has no members. I'm sort of jumping too far ahead, but it's شبه جدا الوقف. يعني من ناحية الستراكشر ومن ناحية الهدف ومن ناحية الجفرنس شبه جدا الوقف في الفقه الإسلامي. Well, foundation has a social purpose. So the foundation-owned firm doesn't exist in the US for tax purposes. بس في Northern Europe, it's also been studied a lot recently. والباحثين لقوا إن ال foundation-owned firms والشركات العادية have almost identical performance. Actually, the foundation-owned firms have some more favorable performance and much more favorable public reception عن ال mainstream conventional corporation. ودي برضو نتيجة, it's very surprising علشان so much of corporate law مبني على ال premise in maximizing shareholder interest when the shareholders are the ones governing and only trying to get their maximized interest is what allows corporations to flourish. What the foundation-owned firm shows, and when you have a majority shareholder that's not just interested in only maximizing profit and has another social function, are able to perform just as well. These are the 3 points كنت عايزة أوضحهم في الكونتكست بتاع مسألة corporate mandate. Corporate mandate, النهاردة I think there's more interest between the linkages of startups with corporations, but this conversation is happening in very main prongs of mainstream corporate governance, corporate law, and investment.
لسه قدام هنخش على الكونتكست المصري مش كده؟
وصلت للكونتكست المصري.
وهو appealing الحاجات دي how can these things be reflected في الكونتكست المصري؟
Exactly. الكونتكست المصري, these are my own reflections بقى في 3 to parallel the 3 في 3 opportunities for intervention أو change. أول حاجة هي ال socially responsible investment. Socially responsible investors span all kinds of models. There is screening for screening companies and only investing in those that meet a certain set of criteria. فمثلا one of those criteria could be empowerment of startups. Engagement, so socially responsible investors being conscious of certain standards and engaging with companies using their leverage as shareholders of some significance to push for certain standards of operation. And isolation. This is similar to the screening, but identifying companies, giving them some targets, and then cutting them out of the investment portfolio if they don't meet it. I know in the Startup Manifesto launched earlier this year, so there is some groundwork being done for مصر في ساحة the socially responsible investment. For the most part, I don't think there is a dominant ecosystem for it. Correct me if I'm wrong. But there's a huge market for it. عشان so many of mainstream investors في مصر وفي دول تانية, especially those who adhere to a certain set of values, already are screening. مثلا Islamic investment screening for certain kinds of products that a company produces, or certain kinds of performance measures, or screening out tobacco producers or pork producers or gambling operations. The premise of socially responsible investment is very much a part of the culture, but as a formal ecosystem, I think it still has a lot of potential for establishment. The second opportunity is our ESG service providers and information generators. ESG refers to environmental, social, and governance, but this is pretty much everything besides a profit-generating mandate of the corporation. And what this looks like in other countries are third-party service providers generating data about companies, how adherent they are to environmental laws, how much training they provide to employees, what kinds of collaborations they provide with small businesses, what kind of workplace protections they have, what kinds of board transition mechanisms they have to ensure sustainability of governance, for example. So environmental, social, and governance indicators are drafted and generated by these entities. They collect the data and they publish it. So they rely on third-party decision-making, investor decision-making, consumer decision-making, managerial decision-making out of interest in competing with or having better practices than peer companies. But the ESG service providers في أمريكا مثلا, as an example, have very much been at the forefront of changing the way that the formal business roundtable example that I gave, the way that the formal legal interpretations are identifying the corporate mandate. This is very much driven not by policy, not by government, but by the third-party ESG data providers. The third example that I think is very much ripe for implementation في مصر هو فكرة النموذج شركة اسمه الcorporate وقف. The corporate waqf, that is pretty much identical to the foundation-owned firm and already exists in Malaysia, Turkey, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. I mention this because this has been one of my very recent research projects, finding the connection between a foundation-owned firm with corporate waqf. They've both simultaneously existed with no awareness of the other, and they're almost identical in terms of legal structure, in terms of mandate, and in terms of performance. الcorporate وقف عبارة عن وقف بالضبط زي charitable foundation that I mentioned for the foundation-owned firm. It allows for a more sustainable, a more focused, and a more publicly facing mandate to be captured at the core of corporate operations. عشان when you have الوقف والمتولي اللي هو مسؤول عن meeting the terms of the original founders' stated intent in establishing الوقف, then you're able to capture this in a way that's much more central and much more sustainable than historically what we've seen مثلا as CSR departments, because this is very much a part of the ownership of the company, not just the management of the company. I see in Masr there's very much the opportunity, and to my very early research thus far, no clear obstacles to this being established as a more mainstreamed form of corporate organization. الcorporate بيسموه الcorporate وقف اللي هو نفس تعريف الفاونديشن owned firm that I mentioned بس في هيكل القوانين أو فقه الأوقاف. So, summarizing more of the Egyptian context or moving forward, I'm very interested, I know this is a fireside chat, I'm very interested in hearing perspectives specific to the Egyptian context. There's a point at which the Western conversation around corporate mandate went from very personified corporations to extremely depersonified corporations and is now making a swing back to try to personify the purpose of the corporation. في مصر نعم يعني corporations ابتدت in the 1800s وكانت family owned companies pretty much. The Rockefellers, all the main families that had big businesses and were able to incorporate وابتدت as very personified. فالعائلات كان بيبقى عندها هدف اجتماعي والهدف الاجتماعي ده was captured also في legal system. في أمريكا depersonification of the corporation ده with that term I refer to in the number of shareholders has become huge. There's no central individual that you would necessarily identify with most corporations. It's very impersonal when you think about the separation between ownership and management. So that leads to a sense of deferred responsibility, and the investors don't feel like they have a very strong hand in changing the activities of the corporation or the purpose of the corporation, so you lose the linkages between ownership and control. Yeah. بس زي ما أنا قلت في البداية دلوقتي الموضوع ده ما بقاش يعني مش مكمل. الموضوع ده has faced a crisis for corporations where there's a swing back to trying to think about how to reinvent the purpose of the corporation at the center of the corporation's identity.
And this is moving into a real stream?
Yeah, for sure. You see it reflected in terms of implementation. You see it reflected in investment behavior. You see it reflected in the reports, the importance of non-financial reports, other kinds of reporting being made available to the public. You see it in consumer behavior in terms of boycotts and things like that. But the reason I mentioned that swing in the Masr, we're actually generally tending to follow in the Western trajectory a few steps behind. we're actually now in a more favorable position in that hasn't happened as much. يعني مثلا في أمريكا family owned companies are 19% of companies. في مصر it's closer to 50 to 60%. So you still have the identity of the family owned companies and the public good that a lot of these families espouse wanting to affect. So one of the things I'd be interested for us to think about is, instead of following the Western trajectory of depersonifying the companies and then swinging back, where this can be leveraged as an advantage, that there's still so much of a family identity bound up in a lot of the family-owned firms or a lot of the startups that are represented here that a lot of you are familiar with. How do we capitalize on this identity factor in order to maintain corporate mandate at the center instead of moving away and coming back? And the other two main things that I think would be interesting for us to discuss or think about is how we're structuring the actual formal setups of the companies. And I think, as many of you will be interested in thinking about linkages with startups, how this can be maybe fed into فكرة الأوقاف والstructure, and how the shares and the revenues to those shares are being brought back into the economic ecosystem. فمثلا ممكن الفاونديشن in a foundation owned firm أو الوقف in a corporate وقف يبقى هدفه supporting early stage startups, for example. For all the revenues that come from 51% of shares in X company go towards seed funding for startups مثلا. For how to create linkages between the social and economic objectives that are probably present here today with the actual corporate structure, the actual formal corporate structure. And the third issue that I mentioned is thinking about the investment sector and how the investment sector can be brought into, whether through ESG indicators, including in ESG indicators, مثلا economic parity, ways that they contribute to making economic access more readily available to small businesses, things like that. How to think about the investment sector and investment indicators as part of the conversation on corporate mandate.
شكرا يا عائشة. طيب، هل في أسئلة ولا أسأل أنا؟ دكتور علي، احنا بنعتذر عن أي حاجة حصلت يعني.
Lucy, I'd like to sort of disagree with you 180 degrees. Well, I think that, I thought this is the reason you studied law. When you look at the law, there is a capital bias inherited in the law. Well, this is very early. I'll give you an example. When the slavery was abolished in the British and then the US 30 years later, دفعوا تعويضات. عارفة التعويضات دي راحت لمين؟ للslavery owners. Because they've lost capital, not the slaves. Now this continued. Now when you look at how the company started, they started by entrepreneurs who were going to the West looking for the gold rush or the oil rush, or whatever you call it. This is how Carnegie started. This is how Rockefeller started, right? Now, I'll give you an example. Carnegie, there is a famous labor revolt. They were slaughtered. They were gunned down. It's called the Homestead Revolt. Now, 10 years later, he was going and starting with a foundation. This is more like whitewashing, excuse my English. Yeah. Rockefeller, when he had Standard Oil. Standard Oil was actually violating every federal law you could even imagine, that the government later on had to break it into 3 companies. I'm talking about Caltex, Texaco, Exxon. Imagine 3 huge companies were actually 1 company. Now, what I'm talking about is that there is really an inherent built-in bias to capital. Now, by the way, there are lots of people talking about that the Industrial Revolution 4.0 is going to be a return of the oil barons. Now we see this. We see a little guy who's a billionaire, Zuckerberg, who's trying to bribe a federal judge, right? Now, I hope we don't follow this by any means. Now, I'm not trying to sort of depress things. Now, there are some spots, some bright spots. Companies doing things on their own, like Hershey, for example, or Cadbury, or طلعت حرب في مصر. Actually, when ابتدى بنك مصر كان في ده كنوع من التحدي للاستعمار. يعني الاستعمار كان هو اللي معاه الفلوس هو اللي بيعمل الانفستمنت. ولما ابتدى يعمل عمل، لما تشوف مثلا عمل المحله، هو عمل غزل المحله، عمل مساكن للعمال، عمل نادي. He was building an ecosystem. They are all doing the same thing. Now, what I'm trying to sort of, what my proposition is, there is really no business case for doing well. The only business case for doing well is because of, you've said it, ESG. It's a risk mitigation. So unless there is a law that sort of puts the boundaries on business, or there is a social or a community backlash, they're still going to do the same thing. Now, one final comment. There are also people talking now about democratizing economy. When they talk about democratizing economy, they're talking about labor-owning companies. They're talking about cooperatives. They're talking about communities owning their own assets. Now, once you do this, then clearly, I mean, labor is not just going to be an expense, like a salary. You look at it as an expense. No, those are owners. So giving them a decent job and a decent salary is just going to follow because they are the owners, right? Community is the same thing. Now, there is actually, the new law actually permits this now, and I think it's going to permit this, that the foundation actually can establish businesses, right? So I think you're going to start seeing this. But again, it's about a law, it's about civic society, it's about it's about natural balance. And the government is part of it, civil society is part of it. If this is not there, you're not going to get companies doing well. I'm talking about the majority. I'm not talking about few bright cases. Thank you.
يعني على كلام الدكتور علي احنا هنمشي وراهم لسه قدامنا شويه عقبال ما نمشي وراهم ونوصل وبعدين نخبط في الحيط وبعدين نرجع تاني. فكره ان احنا خابطين في الحيط هنحفر بقى جوه. مش هنرجع بسهوله. طيب سؤال هنرجع هجي لك عايشه. في اسئله تانية؟ انت عندك سؤال؟ انا عندي ليكي سؤال. عندي ليكي سؤال. being يعني a family business. كم النسبه في الديسيجن ميكنج بتاعكم في الفاميلي للبزنس بره البروفيت ماكسمايزيشن؟ هل في حاجات بتجيت انتو كونسيدريشن بره البروفيت ماكسمايزيشن؟ انا عارف ان مثلا ممكن كاي فاميلي بزنس في مصر بيبقى عنده فلوس بيوديها للزكاه، فلوس بيوديها في رمضان للاسر بتاعت الناس، فدي حاجات ليها علاقه بالامبلويز والحاجات اللطيفه دي، بس ما بتبقاش جوه الديسيجن ميكنج. هل في حاجات في ذهنك في الديسيجن ميكنج بره البروفيت ماكسمايزيشن ليها علاقه بالبيئه، ليها علاقه بالمجتمع، ليها علاقه بالستيك هولدرز تانيين؟ ده سؤال وبعدين ممكن تقولي السؤال بتاعك.
ماشي. طيب انا خليني اقول ان انا يعني كده سامعيني؟ طيب سامعيني؟ طيب خليني اقول ان انا ما بشوفش تعارض ما بين الاثنين، بس انا بشوف الفكره كلها يعني في الكيس عندي في الفاميلي بزنس في التوقيت. البروفيت ماكسمايزيشن ممكن في بعض الاوقات دلوقتي we could make a big profit، بس having an identity أو certain things in mind values ممكن يأخر البروفيت ماكسمايزيشن ده شوية. يعني بين أي شركة وشركة لو احنا بنقول إن في set of values أو mundane أو purpose، I would say إن the difference is the time. دي نقطة. النقطة الثانية type of projects أو products بيبقى ليها social aspect و environmental aspect most of the time. يعني Yes. يعني let's say خلينا نقول ببساطة شديدة business wise if I have 5 products that I can include، عندي 5 products that would have 5 chances of making profits. In the selection process we would be selecting based on there is no one single solution. أنا عندي 5 solutions. One of the criteria إن أنا يبقى عندي social أو environmental impact. We work in plastics. I'm so sorry to say this for all the green people here. But even in plastic, there is a social and packaging plastics mainly. There is a green aspect out of it. So if we have 4 projects that we can develop, we would definitely go for the green one. ده لو ما فيش trade off. اوكي لو ما فيش either or. لو ما فيش trade off هنروح للجرين. الجرينست مش الجرينست لو ما فيش trade off. لو ده ريسك هارد. وبرضه في نقطة عشان ما حسيت في عداء كده. بس في نقطة في كل اندستري مهما كانت شكلها عامل ازاي there is always a better way of doing things. There is an easy way and there is a better way. It's not 0 or 1.
حتى وانت بتعمل حياتك وبروفيت ماكسمايز لو انت conscious you can at least تقلل الحرب شوية.
And I think this is a responsibility because the easiest thing لو أنا في industry like أي sector, the easiest thing is to go for the known, there is profit, business case, got done, go ahead, investment, go ahead. But I think the mind part أو الجزء اللي محتاج شوية تفكير, how can I do it in a better way and with a purpose, لأن ال purpose مش بيعطل إن أنا أعمل profit. هو
This is a different mindset.
Yes.
Of how to create a purpose.
Yes.
Not on a trade-off with the profit.
Yes, exactly.
This is something out of the polarization بتاعت is it for a purpose or for a profit.
أنا بس خليني برضه أقول حاجة. I've dealt with a lot of companies in Germany وإيطالي تحديداً عشان الجزء اللي كانت بتقوله عائشة. It's mainly family business, and one of the things that were very impressive to me, there is always an identity and there is always a purpose behind things, even the small things. Like عارفين التيب بتاع المكتبة, for example, you can find tape السرتاب. You can find a lot of companies, like hundreds of companies, working on the same product. But when it comes to the family أو organizations اللي لسه فيها identity بتاعت owner, it's different. The type of product is different. The marketing even is different. The way they do employ يعني employee benefits and so on. طريقة التفكير is different. It's not that they don't make profit. They make profit, but they do a lot of thinking on how to do it. يعني even I think in other parts of the world. الcorporate وقف. Do you have any names in mind that have actually implemented it, even in Europe, in US as an idea, maybe in like 3 years مثلا?
شكرا جزيلا. طيب أسئلة تاني؟ تفضل.
Given the new civil society law that is about to emerge in Egypt, that is very permissible and allows civil society to start corporations. Now, bridging Dr. Ali's point and what you've been saying, what are the implications of that, and could we see more people-run business or bottom-up businesses that can fill in the gap, make the profit, but ecologically?
ممكن نربط كده.
Dr. Ali, I think maybe you or maybe it wasn't clear enough the reason that I was referring to the historical examples. It's not at all as the historical examples as a nostalgic reference to an ideal model we're going back to. It's actually a legal reference to the fact that there were more legal restrictions that are closer to what we would want to incorporate today, even if the historical era, and of course there's bias towards capital in all sectors of law, not just in corporate law, that the kind of legal restrictions that required an articulation of corporate mandate in registration is something that reflects what we want today, irrespective the political and cultural and social issues of that time. Legally, it's much closer to what we want today versus the deregulated corporate law that we have. So that's the reason that I brought in the historical example, not as a reference to what we want to emulate, but as a legal structure that more closely approximates the purposes we're trying to achieve. And with respect to the point about a business case for doing good, precisely in a common law system, so this wouldn't be relevant in an Egyptian context, for example, but in a common law system like in the US, that business case becomes defined by public, civil society, and consumer behaviors and lawsuits. So the law becomes changed as a function of investor lawsuits, which is happening today. Actually, I have a forthcoming paper coming out about how the socially responsible investors, specifically on the issues of environmental disclosure, the lawsuits that shareholders have been bringing, and the lawsuits that investors have been, institutional investors have been bringing, challenging what goes into business case is exactly what's pushing the boundaries of what's defined as necessary in a company's decision-making or material reporting. So the question of materiality, what information is relevant to the core of a company's operation, to its business case, that's a very elastic definition in the law. The elasticity of that definition becomes informed by civil society and non-political actors. So it's sort of the social movements or the investor behavior or the can be NGO, all kinds of third-party behaviors. Bringing lawsuits are reinforming the laws, and then as a play to catch up, a lot of the statutes are then trying to standardize across these piecemeal laws that are being promulgated. So these are not at all in contradiction. It is a fact that what goes into the parameters of business case is constantly evolving, both to narrow and to expand as a function of this third prong that I've been elaborating. You were asking about examples. There's a number of examples. I also just have, not to keep plugging my own work, but I finally have an outlay of publications. So I have a recent article in the Berkeley Journal on Middle Eastern and Islamic Law, and I elaborate 4 examples in that article. So there's one example in South Asia. It's called Hamdard Corporation. It's a pharmaceutical entity, and it started out as a family firm. It became organized as a corporate waqf, and that provides one. They're all contemporary examples because this model originated about 50 years ago. In Turkey, there's also a number of examples, and some of these are major conglomerates, and some of them are smaller companies. So I can send you the link to that if you want more details. And in Malaysia, they're actually, it's a bit different from Turkey, from the Turkish example and from the South Asian example, because some of these are also state-owned companies, and part of the mandate there is also to allocate, they're not majority shares in these cases, but to allocate certain shares in the company for public benefit. The question about, I think what you're referring to, at least from my exposure, best approximates the what are they called? The corporate cooperatives, but there's a specific, the cooperative corporations. So there's the very famous example that's always referenced is Mondragon in Spain. It was founded by a priest who wanted there to be a kind of equalization between ownership and capital. And so it's a cooperative corporation. Anyone who owns shares in the company is an employee of the company. So there's certainly precedent of that existing. Maybe in Egypt there's more traction to that. In a lot of the Western context, there's resistance because of the whole socialism, capitalism debate. I think actually the cooperative corporations are an excellent example because they bridge this very polarized dichotomy. But I don't know actually of any more recent and successful examples because, to Dr. Ali's point about the salience of capital, Mondragon in more recent years has actually been criticized for defaulting to the standards of a lot of, in sort of cutting a lot of their environmental, social governance, and labor practices because they're trying to compete with more conventionally structured corporations. So unfortunately, I don't have examples, but the imagination for what that can look like, we do have examples to draw upon.
شكرا 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 شكرا. نفسك اتقطع ولا لسه؟ سريع شغال. لسه ماشي. احنا محتاجين قعدات طويله شويه ونخش بعمق. احنا هننتقل من الاكاديمي والنظري الى العملي والشغل على ارض الواقع شكله ايه في مصر. انت عندك سؤال؟ احنا خلصنا.
That these the revenues يعني of these 4 companies would ensure the sustainability of مصر الخير كمؤسسة. فيمكن شوية عندنا restrictions في مصر علشان حد يبقى وقف، يعني الوقف الأهلي أو الخيري في مصر القيود عليه إنه حد يوقف حاجة دلوقتي بقت less likely to happen من أيام الحراسات والمشاكل اللي حصلت في الستينات والسبعينات. ولكن بقى في الوضع الحالي بقى في شركات كتيره سواء حتى قطاع خاص او قطاع حكومي بتالوكيت، يعني سواء عندنا اكزامبلز مثلا CIB عملت CIB فاونديشن وكل سنه بتالوكيت 1.5% almost I guess من الريفينيوز بتاعتها بتروح للفاونديشن سو از فودافون فاونديشن او else. انا عارف ان انت CIB كانت نسمه فرحات الCIB فاونديشن بالظبط. Something that you're just giving this to the foundation as a form of that you're giving back in a form since انه في القانون المصري في restrictions when it comes to having a وقف or basically having a foundation owned by a company given the complication between the two different entities ex وزارة الاستثمار او هيئة عامة الاستثمار versus Ministry of Social Solidarity او وزارة الاوقاف كمان يعني اللي هي دلوقتي
this is little bit more complicated عن في لسه في قانون داخل ان انت تفتح صناديق خاصه. في مشاكل قبل كده من الحاجه اللي اسمها فاونديشن بتبقى تبع الشؤون تضامن، ما هيش تبع القطاع الخاص، وبالتالي لو حصل فيها مشكله حسب القانون اللي طلع قبل كده المشاكل يعني بتندرج مش على الفاوندرز وعلى فلوس الفاوندرز، على الشركه نفسها، ولو ليها ريجنال انتيتي على الريجنال انتيتي كمان. ففي شركات قامت مقفله الجمعيات بتاعتها علشان ما يبقاش في لينك ما بينهم. وفي كومبليكيشن تاني على فكره انك بتوقف علشان بيزنس يقوم فيرسز انك بتوقف علشان حاجه خيريه تشتغل. يعني انك تخش جوه البيربس بتاع الشركه نفسها ان البيزنس يكون قائم على منفعه زي ما ابتدى القانون الكوربوريشن زي ما عايشه كانت بتتكلم. هو قام ليه اصلا؟ البيزنس قام ليه وعشان يوصل لايه؟ ففكره انك تحط دوت از مايند سيت دلوقتي الدكتور علي بيشكك في دوت على مستوى العالم، مش بس على مستوى مصر، على مستوى العالم الدكتور علي بيشكك في دوت. عشان كده انا سالت عائشه از ستريم ولا لا، وانا اعتقد ان هو اذا كان هيبقى ستريم اوت اوف ان في حراك شعبي على ان الناس ما عادتش متقبله البيزنس موديل بيزنس از يوجوال، ما عادش الناس متقبله دوت. واوكيباي الحركات بتاعت اوكيباي وكده بتقوم مش بس بتقوم علشان ان الناس دي مش لاقيه، علشان في تباين في العداله الاجتماعيه وتباين في الطبقات. فبقى في فئات جديده طالعه شايفه ان البيزنس موديل دوت اللي كان شغال ما عادش فاليد، فبيكريت. هل نظام الوقف هيقدر يغير دوت؟ هل هيقدر يغير المانديت بتاع الشركات دي؟ اسئله صعبه جدا وعلى الواقع كمان صعبه جدا. بس الاصعب منها تغيير المايند سيت بتاع البابليك وبتاع الناس اللي شغاله جوه المؤسسات. ففي تجارب كتيره نجحت لان الناس اللي جوه هم كانوا عايزين يغيروا ولقوا وسيله. فاحنا لو حطيناها على تو اكستريم، قوانين والواقع الحالي مش الطف حاجه، it is not that promising ولا البراكتس that promising. لو حطينا على الاكستريم الثاني في بني ادمين في public as consumer واز امبلويز واز شير هولدرز معاهم فلوس، بقى عندهم aspiration beyond the profit maximization وقادرين يعملوا حاجه ويغيروا شويه، بس السيستم not that conducive. ففي لسه سبيكترم واسع محتاج ان احنا نفكر ونشتغل فيه and it is not 0 or 1 again. هنتكلم تاني. زي بي كوربريت كده، اللي هي تبع البيزنس بس ليها معاملات خاصه. احنا كان عندنا دوت يا دكتور، كان عندنا شركات غير هادفه للربح وبعدين اتقفلت قانونا. كان موجود شركات غير هادفه للربح وده جزء من الامباكت انتربرايز، بس اتقفلت لانها لقيت انها بتسمع في حاجات اجتماعيه او سياسيه مش منضبطه بالنسبه لها، فقالت لا نقفل دوت. وده كان ايام دكتور سعد الدين ابراهيم، فاتقفل. وكل الشركات لازم توفق اوضاعها يا شركه يا قطاع. ففيها ليها كمان ابعاد سياسيه واجتماعيه محتاج انها تفكر فيها. المودلز بتاعت بي كوربريت از ان اكزامبل، الحاجات اللي حضرتك بتقول عليها في السعوديه اكزامبل، بس في مصر احنا هنا لسه يا اما تبقى تبع التضامن يا اما تبقى تبع البيزنس، فعليها برضو اسئله.